Alright, in this video, I want to talk about the gift of healing. I've been going over 1st and 2nd Corinthians past week or two, and there's some talk about spiritual gifts, and Paul was talking about praying for these gifts. So I was like, alright, so I would take some time and pray, and he says pray for the most earnest gifts. And he's talking about how prophecy is up there because it edifies the church. And not only that, but when unbelievers hear, they'll be convicted of the truth. So it's like, okay, that's top notch right there. You got to pray for prophecy. But then I was also like, healing. A lot of people, I think, would have their attention given to you if you had the gift of healing. So I was like, all right, those were the two things I was praying about. The gift of prophecy and healing. Because I was thinking those things would really reach people and bring the church into the unity of the mind of Christ. And I was like, that's my goal right there. So pray for that. And then this morning at the laundromat, I was reading through Matthew, and I was reading through, only got through a couple chapters, Matthew 8 and 9, and I was noticing something. There's a lot of healing, but also about how the healing is done. So I decided, hey, I gotta make a video sharing this, because there's something interesting here. And this is from Matthew chapter 8, and in verses 5 through 13, we read about the centurion that comes to Jesus, asking him to heal his servant that is sick of the palsy and is grievously tormented. And Jesus is like, all right, I'll go. And the centurion's like, no, I'm not worthy to have you in my home. He's like, you just speak it. Right? Showing his faith that Jesus, he's the Lord of all creation, and he's the Lord of the heavenly armies. So he can just tell one of his servants, the angels, to do it. Right? He's showing his great faith. And when Jesus answers him, down here at verse 13, he says, go thy way, and as thou hast believed, so be it done unto thee. And his servant was healed in that self-same hour. So you see there how Jesus said, as thou hast believed. Well, we're going to see a common theme here. As thou hast believed. So he's like, oh, you believe that I just speak it? All right. He's healed. Or she's healed. I don't know if it really says if the servant is a male or female there, but your servant's healed. He's like, all right, you believe that? All right, there you go. And the servant was healed. I believe another gospel talks about him actually going home, and then they told him, hey, the servant's healed, and he asked what hour, and it was the same hour that Jesus said to be healed, right? And I'm not sure if there's another instance of healing in this chapter. There's an instance here where he cast devils out of people into pigs, and then the people want to kick Jesus out of town. And I was like, isn't that interesting that these people were healed from the devils, and they didn't care. They cared that they lost their pigs. And I was like, yeah, that really shows our sinful nature, doesn't it? Get out of here, Jesus, even though you're healing people. Now, here's another interesting one from Matthew chapter 9. There's actually a couple of, I think 3 healings I'm going to talk about in this chapter. Another person sick with a palsy, and he's laying on a bed, and it says here in verse 2, and behold, they brought to him a man sick of the palsy, lying on a bed, and Jesus, seeing their faith, said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, be of good cheer, thy sins be forgiven thee. So, a couple of things to point out here. He calls him son. This gives reference to actually being part of the family of God, because not everybody's part of the family of God. You have to be born into it, or born again, right? The nation of Israel at the time would be considered God's family. But they were cast off, and now you have to be born again to be part of the family, right? So he calls him son, and then he says, thy sins be forgiven thee. So you see what's going on here about how the person is healed here. It has to do with a rebirth and having their sins forgiven. Another example, I think, is back here in chapter 8. I think he's talking about somebody with leprosy in this chapter. I think it's, yeah, right here, the very first paragraph here, verses 1 through 4. There's a leper, and it says, Jesus, hey, if you will it, I can be clean, right? In leprosy is a reference to our sinful nature, how it just constant decay. Someone with leprosy is just falling apart. They look kind of like the living dead when it gets really severe, like a zombie. But they're not. They're still alive. But it just shows what happens because of sin and our sinful nature, and what's going to happen to the people in hell is a constant degradation, where they just become worse and worse. But he says to Jesus, hey, if you will it, I can be clean. And Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, and he's healed. Now, that says a lot right there, because someone with leprosy is not to be touched. They're contagious. That's why they're put out of the city, and they have their leper colonies, because unless there's a miracle that heals them, they cannot be healed, and they're not allowed back in with society. This is an example of society being heaven and the leper colony being hell, right? Unless there's a miracle, they're done, right? And Jesus touches this person, and to think of this, he says, if you will that I be clean, I will be clean. You think of this as like you have two children playing out in the mud, right? You clean one of them off, and they take a bath, and the other one's waiting outside because you don't want mud everywhere. And now the clean child's going to meet the dirty child. Now, if they were to come into contact, would the cleanness of the clean child rub off onto the dirty child? No, it wouldn't, right? Just like a bad attitude and a good attitude, the bad attitude rubs off, not the good attitude, right? We notice that with children and with people in general. That's why you got to be careful who you hang out with, because if you're a person with good character, just because you have good character doesn't mean it's going to rub off on the others, right? Their bad character will rub off on you, just like the dirty child, the dirt will end up going upon the clean child. But here, we don't see that. Jesus touches the leper, and Jesus doesn't become unclean, yet the leper is healed. Now, something interesting happens there, because I believe it is in one of these healings that they talk about right here at verse 17. It says, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, himself took our infirmities and bare our sicknesses. So you see what was going on when he touched that leper, as he took his sickness upon himself, so that the leper could be clean. He made an exchange there, showing you how your sins are actually forgiven and how healing actually happens. You see, the healer takes on the infirmity, the sickness, and it passes the health to the one being healed. That's how we are healed, not just from the sins, but our physical infirmities. So I was starting to get some insight here of how people are healed. It's not just a be healed, there's a miracle. No, there's something that's going on. And this explains why some people are healed and why others are not, which I'll explain as I continue on here, coming back to Matthew chapter 9. Now, when he heals the fella who has palsy here, they're saying he's speaking blasphemy. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm not sure if it's even in this one, but another gospel where they say, hey, only God can forgive sins, right? Well, Jesus said, hey, right here in verse 6, let me highlight that. But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. And he told the fellow to get up, and the fellow got up and went home. And then it says here in verse 8, but when the multitude saw it, they marveled and glorified God, which had given such power unto not just the man Jesus, but unto men, not just the Catholic magisterium clergy to forgive sins, but unto men. You see, it's not just a certain group. And this will unfold as we look at more of these healings that Jesus does here. Coming down here, which is interesting right here, these verses 16 and 17 talk about being born again. You know, the new cloth and the old wineskin need to be changed out so that you're reborn, so that you can receive the new wine or the new spirit. But here we have a couple more healings going on here. And we'll notice a continuation of the same theme, where verses 18 and 19, it says, while he spake these things unto them, behold, there came a certain ruler, and worshipped him, saying, my daughter is even now dead, but come, lay thy hand upon her, and she shall live. And Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. And you notice here that with the centurion, he was like, yeah, I'll go with you. But the centurion's like, no, you just can speak it. I'm not worthy to have you into my home. But this ruler here, he feels like he's worthy to have Jesus. Not that this is a bad thing, because Jesus is humble and he'll go visit anybody, right? But you see how his faith is different, where it's not, hey, just speak and she'll be healed or raised from the dead. Come and touch her. Because if you just lay your hands on her, then I don't know, she'll live. So he sees things. I mean, he sees how she'll be healed differently, right? So you know how Jesus said, according to your faith. So Jesus didn't just say, no, I'll speak it and she'll be okay. No, just like the centurion where he said, I'll go, but the centurion's like, no. By his faith, that's how he ended up fulfilling their request, according to your faith. And as we see here, the man's like, oh, if you lay your hand upon her. So Jesus is like, oh, sorry about that. He didn't say, no, I'll just speak it. He did it according to his faith. Okay, you think if I touch her, that's will do it? I'll do that for you. Right? So he'll do it according to your faith so that you'll believe. Because ultimately, what the issue is you believing. So if you believe it's by him speaking, he'll speak it so that you'll be like, oh, he said it, so I know it's true. But if you think, oh, he has to touch her or him, I'll do that so that you can see that. And because of your belief, that's what actually cause it. As we actually see in the very next healing right here. Verses 20 through 22, it says, and behold, a woman which was diseased with an issue of blood 12 years came behind him and touched the hem of his garment. For she said within herself, this is faith, something she's saying within herself, if I may but touch his garment, I shall be whole. So you see, she has faith that all she has to do is touch his garment. They don't even have to touch him, but his garment, which is a symbol of his righteousness. Your clothing represents that. But Jesus turned him about, and when he saw her, he said, daughter. So you see here again, being his child, be of good comfort. Thy faith had made thee whole, and the woman was made whole from that hour. Now, I believe in one of the other Gospels, it talks about how Jesus felt someone touch him. He's like, I felt virtue leave me. So you see that the healing actually comes from your faith in God, your belief and trust in Him. Because Jesus didn't reject her healing, right? She just had faith. If I touched His garment, I would be healed. And then Jesus was like, hey, wait, virtue just went out from me. So you see that by your faith, your infirmities, your sin is going to be passed to Jesus, and His virtue is going to come to you. By faith, believing and trusting God. So it wasn't that Jesus had to do something. No, it's that you have to believe. And you see, a lot of the problem seems to be is that we don't believe, or we think God has to do it in a certain way, right? So it won't be done because the way the healing is coming about is not the way that you believe it should be coming about. So you're blocking the whole connection, because the whole connection you have with God is by your belief and trust in Him, your faith. And if there's something that's blocking that, then that connection's cut off, and it's not allowing the healing. It's not allowing the forgiveness of the sins. Because it seems as though our infirmities have something to do with our conscience, our regret, our guilt, and the allowing of the enemy to mess with us, because our connection with God has been interrupted because of some kind of interference with our faith. Oh, I don't think God really wants me talking to Him right now because of what I did or something, or what I said. And you allow that disconnect. So because of your belief, you're cut off from God. Not that you're actually disconnected, but you're choking out that connection, and you're allowing other things to interfere, such as your own flesh telling you all this stuff. The devil and his minions, those spirits, put things into your head and end up creating the infirmity. But by your actual connection with God, you believe that you have that connection, whether you believe you have it just because you read His Word and you believe it, or you believe it because of something else. But you got that faith that has that connection, that brings the forgiveness, that brings the healing, and that connection, there's a transfer. You are forgiven and you are healed because your sin and your infirmity has passed from you to God, and then His life, His health has passed to you. His virtue, as Jesus says in one of the other Gospels, and I figure I might as well bring that up because they usually have a link right here. So let's see, is it Mark or Luke? And I'm going to check out Luke. Luke 8:40. Let's just look through here. Yeah, it's right here. Verses 45 and 46. And Jesus said, who touched me? When all denied, Peter and they that were with him said, Master, the multitude throng thee and press thee, and sayest thou, who touched me? And Jesus said, somebody hath touched me, for I perceive that virtue is gone out of me. You see, you can touch God right now by faith. You believe and trust in Him that He loves you, He's for you, He's not against you, that He's very patient with you, full of mercy and grace. That right there is where you touch God. And when you touch Him, His virtue passes to you. And He takes that sin, that guilt, that regret, and that infirmity onto Himself. Just like we were reading right here, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of Isaiah the prophet, saying, Himself took our infirmities and bare our sicknesses. It's ultimately what forgiveness is not just a release of debt, like, oh, forget about it. whoever's doing the forgiving is paying the debt. Like if you owe me $500 or I owe you $500, let's do it the other way around. Let's put this on you. I owe you $500, but you forgive me for the $500. Well, that just doesn't mean it dissipated. That means you took the hit. You basically said, you know what? Forget it. I'm paying the $500 and I'm just going to forgive you of it. So whoever's doing the forgiving is taking the debt upon themselves. And ultimately, we see this connection, this theme going on with Jesus' healings, that his healings have to do with the person's faith, believing and trusting him. As I believe also in Matthew chapter 9 here, there's another healing, 2 blind men. And they come to him saying, heal us. And Jesus, verse 28, I'll just read it here. It says, and when he was come into the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said unto them, believe ye that I'm able to do this? Because they're just asking him, hey, thou son of David, have mercy on us. Right? They want to be able to see because they're blind. Right? And you notice that he asked, you believe that I can do this? And then verse 29, because they said yes, at the end of verse 28 there, then touched he their eyes, saying, according to your faith be it unto you. So it's according to your faith. And I actually have another passage here where we can see that there's an issue, again having to do with belief, trusting God here. In Mark chapter 5, verse 28, verses 39 through 42, but before I read that, we can see that theme about the person's belief and trust in God, their faith in him, and how God will do it according to your faith. And when you have that belief and trust in God, there's a connection that opens up where what is good about God can pass from him to you, and what is bad about you passes from you to him. And that is how he's able to pay your debt. He takes it upon himself. And in Mark 5, this is where Jesus comes to basically raise the young woman back to life. And he comes to the house, and at verse 39 it says, and when he was come in, he saith unto them, why make ye this ado and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, he taketh the father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with him, those that actually believed, and entered in where the damsel was lying. And he took the damsel by the hand, and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is being interpreted, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. I wonder if that's some kind of angelic language or something. Not sure. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years, and they were astonished with a great astonishment. So you see here that these kind of things happen when you have a relationship with God. You notice that only the people who believed and trusted God, showing they have a relationship with him, were there to see the person raised from the dead. But I imagine the people who didn't believe, when she rose from the dead, they were probably like, oh yeah, she wasn't really dead, right? Because they don't believe. So they make up an excuse of like, oh yeah, she's alive because she was never really dead, right? Because God reveals himself to those who have a relationship with him, those that believe and trust him. That's what opens up that connection there. And I just wanted to make this video to show you this insight that I was getting about this, that this gift of healing is within all of us. And ultimately, it's not so much about someone like me saying you are healed in the name of Jesus, or touching you and saying that. It's about your belief in God. And if your faith is not necessarily in your connection with God, but that someone like me has that connection with God, and that if I say it and if I touch you, then God will heal you. God will do it according to your faith, because your faith is ultimately in Him, right? Your belief and trust is ultimately in Him. So He'll do it according to that faith you have in Him. But it can happen just by you right now having that connection with Him. And I just wanted to share this with you all, because I know we all struggle with this, where there's times where we're sick or other people are sick and we want to help them and we want to heal them. And we're kind of like, why doesn't God give me the gift of healing? Or why doesn't God just heal them? And when we pray for this, there might be all kinds of different things interfering. Like the person being healed may not believe that the prayer will heal them. They might not believe that the person can heal them by the touch or by their words. Or they might just not believe in God at all, right? And you notice all the people that are healed believe, they have faith, they trust God. And it doesn't seem as though that those that are not really actually part of the family of God will necessarily be healed, right? So we got to think about these things a little bit to help us understand that sometimes this is why there isn't healing, right? A lot of times why there needs to be healing is because the person needs to be born again. They need to pass their sins onto Jesus, that His virtue may leave Him to them. They have to touch Him by faith so that they may be healed, right? So yeah, I hope this explains this. I hope you're able to grasp what's going on and why there is healings at times and why at times there's not. So ultimately, the person being healed needs to touch God by faith. They need that connection so that their sin, their sinful nature, their infirmities pass to God. He takes it upon Himself, and then He's able to then give His life, His health, His righteousness to the one touching Him. Because God is all everywhere. His Spirit's here. You just got to grab a hold of that. And that's ultimately where these gifts of healing come from, is the Spirit of God. And each one of us can grab a hold of that. The problem is you might not think, oh, well, God didn't give me the gift of healing, or He won't heal me. You know, you're telling yourself something, right? That, oh, I deserve this. This is some kind of chastisement, or whatever it is. There's probably something blocking your belief and trust in God. So what you might want to be praying, if there's something to do with healing, is pray for yourself and the person being healed, that God helps you with your unbelief, that He reveals to you your blockage, if it's coming from some kind of lack of belief and trust in Him, from your lack of faith. What's the issue? And how can you build that belief and trust in Him? How can that faith grow and the blockage be removed? So with all that being said, thanks for watching. Take care. Alright, here's the 3 verses that I like to put in all the videos here. Isaiah 34:16, seek ye out the book of the Lord and read, so that Jesus doesn't tell you what He tells the Sadducees here in Matthew 22:29, ye do err, not knowing the scriptures. It's not that you err in error because you don't know the one true church that happens to be your denomination, or that you don't know the fundamental beliefs, or the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, or whatever creed, or that you don't know the magisterium or the clergy, or you don't know your favorite pastor or priest. That's why you're in error. No, you're in error because you don't know the scriptures. You need the scriptures to test to see whether or not those are correct, whether those are the right traditions, whether those are legitimate clergy, whether that church is actually following God, and whether those creeds line up. Those fundamental beliefs are found in the scriptures, because Knowing the scriptures is knowing God. Like we read here in John 17:3, Jesus says, "And this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent." This is a deep knowing. As Adam knew Eve and she conceived, you need to know God in like manner, so that you may be born again, that his word, his seed, it abides in your heart, where you truly believe that Jesus Christ is God in the flesh, that he died in your place and gives you his life in exchange, so that your righteousness, your good and your bad, your life, past, present, and future, died 2,000 years ago. Your life is his. He can do what he wants with it. He puts it to death, and he gives you his life in exchange, his perfect, eternal life. That's the deep knowing you need to know of God. So, there you go. Do you know him? Do you want to know him? Get to know him. Thanks again for watching. Take care.
That fella couldn't join the church. He couldn't join the church. He couldn't get baptized. He couldn't get baptized. He woke up with God. He woke up with the devil. Are you saved? Amen. So that fella didn't take the sacraments. Didn't take the sacraments. Didn't say the rosary. Didn't take the rosary. Didn't tithe. Didn't tithe. He went to heaven. He went to hell. You saved? Didn't keep the law. He didn't keep the law. He broke the commandments. He broke the commandments. He didn't keep the golden rule. He didn't keep the golden rule. He woke up in glory. He woke up in the pit. Are you saved? You're saved. If you're not saved, you're over here or you're over here. You sure ain't in the middle. He said, Lord, remember me, thou comest thy kingdom. And Jesus turned to him and said, Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be saved. It's like that. You have been saved? If you ever saved, you were saved like that.